Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to develop emotional mastery by integrating the mind and body. Alright, so this video is all about cultivating emotional mastery through integrating the mind and body and why it's so important to do that if we want to cultivate mastery over our emotional state. I'll also be sharing with you a dynamic that I call the tyrannical mind dynamic. This is where the mind becomes too dominant, too much in control, and chokes out the wisdom of the body. And I'll be sharing with you a simple practice for how to avoid the tyrannical mind dynamic and how to consult the body's wisdom to make wiser decisions in the present moment. Now this video is a little bit different than the videos that I typically make, where I typically share them as like a talking head video. In this video, I'll actually be sharing with you a clip from a webinar that I created recently called The 3 Keys to Emotional Mastery. So I'm going to be sharing with you one of the tips that I share in that webinar. And if you want to watch the extended version of the webinar, you can go to emotionalmastery.org to sign up. I mean, it's totally for free. And basically, I'm just going to be sharing with you a clip. And then if you're interested in watching more, you can go and sign up there. All right, so without further ado, I'll go ahead and I'll show you the clip now. Okay, so let's move on now and talk about the second key to emotional mastery, which is integrating the mind and body so that you can gain more clarity and make wiser decisions in the present moment. Now, the reason why integrating the mind and body is so important as it pertains to the goal of developing emotional mastery is that emotions are the carriers of the body's wisdom, and they are the language that the body uses to communicate its needs, fears, preferences, boundaries, and gut feelings. And a huge part of emotional mastery is about being able to skillfully read your emotions and use them for decision making. And truly, when it comes to knowing yourself and making decisions, if you're out of touch with the body and the emotions, then you just aren't going to be getting that important information about yourself, and you'll be making decisions with far less perspective and far less self-knowledge. This makes it a lot more likely that you'll go over your own boundaries and create lots of internal conflict. And this will stand directly in the way of you being comfortable in your own skin because you will be at war with yourself. This is why, like I mentioned before, trying to get to a state of emotional mastery by becoming less sensitive just isn't going to work out. And that's because sensitivity to the body's messages is necessary for developing emotional mastery. Now, I want to give you an analogy to illustrate this point. Think of the body like an airplane and the emotions as being like the navigation system of that airplane. And the plane's navigation system indicates to the pilots all sorts of important information, like the coordinates of the position of the plane and whether or not the plane is on the correct route and a number of other things. And if the pilots don't pay attention to the navigation system, then they are very likely to make the wrong decisions and to steer the plane the wrong way and maybe even use the wrong controls. And of course, we would all be terrified to be on that plane. Luckily, industry-trained pilots are very good at checking the navigation systems of their plane. You can tell because there are very few lost planes and very few plane crashes from major airlines. But unfortunately, because most of us weren't taught the value or function of the emotions, and we weren't taught how to understand the emotions, most people are like pilots flying a plane without consulting their navigation system. In fact, many of us were even praised as children for being out of touch with our emotional navigation system. Like if we got hurt without making a fuss, we might have been complimented and called a little trooper, or we might have been called a good little boy or a good little girl if we tuned out from our inner knowing to comply with the expectations that were placed upon us. The fact of the matter is that most people are specifically taught to ignore and work against their emotions, and that emotions are just a sign of weakness, and that not feeling them is a sign of character or moral virtue. Can you imagine if we praised pilots for their strength of character and moral virtue and being a good little pilot for not checking the navigation system of their plane? It would be absolutely ridiculous and dangerous. And yet so many of us, including myself, have been taught to navigate life and the vehicle that is our body that way. So this is a huge reason why I feel compelled to teach the emotional mastery method and why I've created this training that I'm sharing with you today. Most of us, including myself, were taught that emotions were unimportant at best and a sign of weakness at worst. And because of this, most of us never got the proper emotional education and never developed emotional literacy. And this is no criticism to anyone's childhood caregivers, including my own. This was and still largely is the prevailing mindset that people hold on to in relation to the emotions. This way of thinking about the emotions has been normalized for a long time and just thought of as common sense. So developing emotional mastery and emotional literacy is actually something that's a very cutting edge kind of endeavor. Right now, the emotional literacy rate is similar to how the actual literacy rate was over 100 years ago. Back in the year 1900, only about 20% of the population, the world's population, could read. And now, as of the time of my filming this, the world literacy rate is 87%. Honestly, the emotional literacy rate is definitely lower than 20% right now, but it is one of my deepest wishes that the world becomes more aware of the value and function of the emotions, and that the emotional literacy rate, it also sees a similar increase to the actual literacy rate, but in a shorter period of time. And it is my hope that this training today and the emotional mastery method plays some part in that increase in emotional literacy, one person at a time. So how can we develop deeper levels of emotional literacy and emotional awareness? Well, that's where the second key comes in. We'll want to integrate our body and mind to create a symbiotic partnership between the two. You see, the mind and body function very differently. The mind tends to function more logically, abstractly, and idealistically, while the body tends to function more instinctually and emotionally. The mind is capable of being imaginative and gets abstract thoughts and ideas, and it can even plan ideas that stretch far into the future. The mind can also create principles that it wants to stick to consistently, even in situations where those principles don't work out very well. The body, on the other hand, sends us messages that are very present in the right now. And the body can use emotions to tell us what we really want, what we like, what we dislike, what goes over our boundaries, and what provokes anger or disgust in us, and what our gut or our intuition is telling us. So if we want to integrate the mind and body, we'll want to think about the interactions between these two dissimilar parts of ourselves as being analogous to the interactions between a horse and a rider. The rider has the ideas and the vision of the destination that they want to ride to, and the horse has its hardwired animal instincts and intuition. And if the rider wants to get the horse to take them to the destination they want to get to, the rider has to know how to listen to the horse's cues and to meet the horse's needs and to figure out what motivates the horse. And most importantly, to not go over the horse's boundaries. And just like the horse and the rider ideally work together like partners, we want the mind and body to work together like partners. But often, because most of us were never taught about how to be emotionally literate or how to attune to the body, most people's minds become tyrannical over the body, where the mind tries to control the body and bend the body to its whims. I call this the tyrannical mind. The tyrannical mind dynamic arises when we lose sensitivity to the emotions and the body's cues, or we consciously try to ignore them. Now, to bring this back to our rider and horse metaphor, it's where the rider isn't attuned to the horse at all and just whips it and whips it and whips it to get the horse to go where the rider wants them to go. This is, of course, very unsustainable over the long term because the horse will just lay down eventually. But similarly, when we are in tyrannical mind mode, we make decisions with our mind that our body isn't okay with, that go over our body's boundaries. And because we generally aren't taught how to listen to the body and to the emotions, we become desensitized to a huge component of our own wisdom, personal sovereignty, and inner guidance. And this tyrannical mind dynamic can be very subtle. For example, several years ago, I attended a meditative retreat that gave me the time and space to get more in touch with the wisdom of the body. And I was much more attuned to my feelings with a clarity that I hadn't yet experienced in my adult life. And I was sitting down on my mat on the final day, and I thought with my mind, I should get up. But because I was very sensitive to my emotions, I got a very clear message from my body that indicated to me that I didn't actually want to get up at all. I wanted to continue sitting there. Now, typically, I wasn't so tuned into these bodily messages. In my journey from childhood to adulthood, I had many years of practice strengthening the habit of tuning out from my emotional state to get things done and to do what should be done or what I have to get done. And I learned to pay more attention to my mind's goals, patterns, and principles than to my body's messages and intuitions. Now, mind you, sometimes it's necessary to do the things that we don't want to do if we want to get certain results. But it hit me like a ton of bricks in that moment there on the mat that I was very subtly, automatically, and constantly ignoring the wisdom of my body in favor of the mind's idea of what I should be doing or what I think would be ideal. And I was doing this all unconsciously. And because I had this unconscious habit of ignoring my emotions, I was constantly violating my own boundaries and bending myself out of shape every single day without even knowing it. And it was only in that experience of sensitization to my emotions that I realized how desensitized I'd become to them and how tyrannical my mind had become, making all the decisions without listening to my body at all. And there are many problems that arise from the tyrannical mind. With the tyrannical mind, we make decisions big and small that we don't really want. We lack clarity about our life's trajectory. We go over our own boundaries. We don't listen to our gut and end up in bad situations. We're unclear about the boundaries we need to set with others. And most of all, we create lots of internal conflict. What you'll want to do instead when making decisions is to practice allowing your mind to take a back seat and tuning directly into the body. You see, emotions arise as sensations in the body, and it's common that we jump immediately from the experience of an emotion into a thought story in our mind about the experience of that emotion. So we'll want to practice noticing what's going on in the body physically before we jump into the mind's stories about the emotion. And then once you've considered the body's input, you can then make the decision. One simple practice that you can use to do this is to practice making low-stakes decisions by consulting the body's wisdom. Let's say that you're trying to decide what to eat for lunch. Instead of immediately weighing that decision out in your mind, you'll want to tune into the body to see if it has any visceral draw toward one choice or the other. Or you could take an intuitive walk where you have no particular destination. And every time you come to a fork in the road, you feel the sensations that are arising in the body and see if you're intuitively drawn to one direction or another. This will help you build the habit of checking in with your body first before the mind makes a decision, and it will help you strengthen the muscle of understanding the emotions. And most importantly, it will create space for your mind and body to co-navigate as you make decisions. Okay, so in conclusion, and again, write this down, take a screenshot of this, don't let your mind choke the wisdom of the body out of your awareness. The truth is that developing emotional mastery requires a very cooperative relationship between your thoughts and feelings. All right, so that's it for tip number 2 from the Emotional Mastery webinar. I hope that you enjoyed that. If you would like to watch more from the Emotional Mastery webinar, the 3 keys to emotional mastery, you can check that out at emotionalmastery.org. And you can sign up there and it's totally for free. And I highly recommend doing that if you're interested in mastering your emotions, cultivating emotional mastery. This is especially true if you happen to be somebody who is a highly sensitive person, because this is a webinar for highly sensitive people who want to master their emotions and feel more comfortable in their own skin without suppressing their feelings. However, even if you're not a highly sensitive person, you can still really benefit from the content in the webinar, so I highly recommend checking it out. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now. I hope that you enjoyed that video. If you did, go ahead, click the like button below and subscribe and leave me a comment down below. And again, if you want to check out that webinar, that's at emotionalmastery.org. And until next time, keep becoming more you.